Genos Kun glanced over his soldiers. He had just recently given the order to prepare for battle and deploy. He looked at the faces of his troops, fatigued but still confident. He had led them on a very long march, and he had penetrated further into the Empire than any Golden Horde fighting force ever had. He was hoping to strike as much fear into the heart of the Empire as he could. He looked down at his metal fingers, shaking them slightly to expel the sand that was building up in his joints. I hate the sand, he thought. It's coarse and it gets everywhere. He was suddenly overcome with anxiety. The raid against the southern stone camp flashed across his memory. It wasn't his finest hour. It was the first real raid he had commanded, and the Horde was victorious only by a slim margin. He wouldn't let it happen again. He went over the raid in his mind so he could pinpoint what went wrong. Not enough bolts last time. This time we haven't made that mistake. But it wasn't just that. We lingered too long, as he thought deeper. He began to replay the battle in his head. It was almost dark when he reached the camp, and unlike usual when the Golden Horde preferred to fight in the day, as it made their ranged attacks more effective, he disregarded it this time. So reckless, he thought. Still, the opening stages were very successful. He deployed the raiding party on a small nearby hill, and as usual, the battle would open by having his eagles take aim and snipe at the enemy slavers on the turrets. This would bring forth the first wave, which was easily dispatched by the Horde. Then would come the second wave, usually more numerous than the first. However, in this case it wasn't. It was lesser. This would lead Genos to believe that the town was sparsely garrisoned. This was not the case, he learned quickly as he gave the order to advance into the city. As soon as the Horde party moved beyond the walls, they could see the slavers were simply waiting to strike. They had more turrets set up on guard towers, and a host of slavers waiting to give battle. What ensued was a desperate melee and brutal house-to-house combat as the Horde tried to gain a foothold in the city. During the fighting, the Horde began to get more and more spread out, and some of the stragglers became easy pickings for the slavers. Pow, chaotic cubism, beefcake, and more would end up being taken prisoner or enslaved by the defenders. Fortunately for the Horde, the defenders had no way of transporting these captives, so they would be easily freed by their comrades before they were taken away. What was taken from them, in many cases, was their weapons and armor, a huge embarrassment for any Horde soldier, and particularly for a light trooper. The katana they were issued upon entering the army was a great source of pride for every Horde soldier. The average light trooper in the Golden Horde would carry a katana of the same quality as an Empire noble, a testament to their skilled manufacturing power. To lose it was like losing a part of their identity. In particular, chaotic cubism would confide in Genos that he felt naked and powerless when the Empire took his katana, and vowed that he would never fight with a sword again until he could recover his lost weapon, a near impossible task that would relegate him to unarmed combat forever, potentially. But he asked Genos to teach him in the ways of unarmed combat, something he happily agreed to do. The fighting in the stone camp continued for days as Horde troops would desperately take cover from enemy fire, returning with their own when they could. The Empire kept streaming reinforcements into their camp in order to try and take it back, but the Horde held its ground, on average killed 5 soldiers apiece. Before long, the main street was thick with blood and carnage. It was time to finish the slave master. His guard had been squandered in defense of the city, so slaying him proved easy. Once this task was completed, Genos Kun gathered his forces and left the camp, with many of his soldiers maimed and wounded and having to be carried on the backs of their comrades. After his first raid, Genos Kun returned to the Golden City for the first time in many weeks to resupply and re-equip his raiding group. Despite the fact the first battle was a difficult one, Genos Kun was victorious. He would use these lessons going forward as he planned another audacious raid, this time as far north as any Horde raiding party had ever ventured, all the way to the southern port, a key iron mine and manufacturer for the Empire. With his next target decided, he moved out once again, leading the skeleton back to his present moment in time. Genos pushed the anxiety down inside him and walked to the front of his battle line. Not one for fancy speeches, Genos looked at his grim cohort and said, "Comrades, you know the plan. Execute the plan and we will be victorious. Failure is not an option." He turned and walked towards the camp. He appeared in front of the guards at the gate. "More anti-slavers," the guard shouted. "Sound the alarm, muster the men for battle." The initial guards charged at the Golden Horde's line and met Genos Kun in open battle. He could have easily dispatched these slavers on his own. However, with his raid group behind him, it made the task laughably simple. Genos smashed the slavers into the ground with his metal fists. His martial competency had come so far since he joined the Horde. Those that avoided Genos attacked the soldiers behind him and were wiped out in a flurry of arrows. Genos moved forward again to tempt more slavers to attack. Once again, men came out to greet the Horde, and once again they were cut down with ease. The strategy the Horde had formulated since the first attack on Eye Socket proved to be effective. This time, however, Genos Kun was far more patient, allowing the slavers to thin out. This time, when the Horde would enter the city, the fight would be much easier. The Golden Horde cleared the streets without issue, but there was one major obstacle remaining. The Slave Master had refused to give battle with his elite guard. It was clear he was hoping to draw the Horde into a pitched battle where his armored elites could overwhelm his lightly armored raiders. Genos took in his surroundings and formulated a plan. There was a bar right beside the slaver's house, and in that instant, Genos Kun devised a tactic that would soon become a Horde staple. "Everyone, get on the second floor of that building and cover me on the ground," Genos said. The raiders listened, but Sly Desert Fox approached Genos. "I've used all my bolts, Commander. I cannot cover you," he said. "Then draw your sword, comrade, and join me on the ground," Genos replied. Sly obliged and drew his katana. The blade shone brightly in the afternoon sun. The two skeletons approached the slave master's house, but when Genos Kun tried to open the door, he found it to be locked. "Leave it to me, Commander," Sly said, and skillfully unlocked the front door. When it opened, the pair saw a horde of elite samurai with their nodachis drawn and ready for combat. The two skeletons immediately turned and ran. The samurai followed, which was exactly what they wanted. The building where the Horde was stationed was not far away, and soon enough the Horde gave the samurais a withering barrage of fire. Now Genos and Sly could turn and face the samurai. Most of the samurai began to engage Genos, while Sly turned to find himself face to face with the slave master staring him down. Swords drawn, the two engaged in a tumultuous clash of steel. The slave master was exceptionally skilled with the blade, and if the battle had been fought fairly, Sly certainly would have lost. Fortunately for Sly, fighting fairly was the last interest of the Horde, especially when it came to fighting slavers. One of the raiders on the second floor of the bar spotted the slave master and called out his position to his comrades. In that moment, half a dozen raiders aimed their crossbows at the slave master and fired. Without the thick armor of his guards, the arrows pierced the slaver with ease. Genos Kun, on the other hand, had his hands full. Fighting so many elites was outside even his capacity. He wondered if even the legendary Tin Fist could win with these odds. While the raiders continued to pour arrows into the samurai, their thick armor protected them from much of the damage they would do. Some were even getting past Genos and trying to fight the raiders on top. Unfortunately for them, the raiders were no slouches when it came to melee combat, and not enough would make it to the second floor to disturb the Horde's formation. Eventually, the arrows would take their toll on the samurai, and even their armor could not protect them from every arrow. And eventually, the weaknesses and blood loss would turn the tide, especially when Sly joined Genos once again. The Horde would be able to finish the fight. Once the dust settled, the Horde would regroup and examine their work. "Excellent work, comrades," Genos said. "You executed our plan without hesitation, and victory was achieved with minimal loss." The small group cheered in agreement. "Now, Sly, free the slaves. I'll tend to the wounded. Everybody post watch, and be ready to move out quickly. Once we free the slaves here, we must depart before reinforcements come. I don't want a repeat of the last raid." The Horde executed their orders quickly, and Sly freed the slaves in the camp, and before Genos knew it, he had another new complement of recruits to bring to the Golden Horde. He gathered up his forces and made his return to Brink. Once Genos returned to Brink, he informed Temujin of his great success. The slave farm, the stone camp, and the southern port now all lay in ruins. In addition to this, Genos' efforts had freed dozens of slaves, many of whom had joined the Golden Horde and swelled its ranks. This allowed Temujin to fill out the Horde with a civilian population, and many of them were assigned to non-combat duties back at the Golden City. And no longer would Temujin have to worry about the flow of food and materials to whichever corner of the earth he would decide to wage war. Temujin was pleased to hear of Genos' exploits. In his time at Brink, Temujin had been organizing the Horde for another great battle. "It is almost time, my friend," Temujin said to Genos upon his return, "for the Golden Horde's next great conquest, and this could be the one that could crumble the Empire completely. However, before we do this, we still need more soldiers, and I know exactly where to get them." Temujin showed Genos a map of the continent. The Golden Horde and our allies now control massive swaths of land. In fact, I am sure in terms of land area we exceed even the Empire at this point. However, we are still not even close to matching their economic power. This next conquest will change that. I estimate that we will need 8 Arbons to accomplish it. The slaves you have freed have brought us very close to this number, but we are not there yet. In order to muster the soldiers we need, I plan to free the prisoners at Tengu's vault. The Khan pointed forcefully to the map. The Empire is said to keep his most hardened criminals in there. Something tells me they might hold a grudge against the Emperor and will join us. In addition, it will be another display of weakness for the Empire, once they have realized that again, their hardened enemies are released and intend to cause them as much harm as possible. I am sure their already fragile morale will plummet even further. "A sound plan, Khan. I shall take my raiding group out at once," said Genos. "Not so fast, my friend," said the Khan. "I had Slick scout the vault already, and it is quite a fortress. I won't be sending you out unsupported. I and the first heavy Arbon will be joining you." "Of course, Khan," said Genos. Temujin smiled wryly. "Then shall we go, my friend?" Genos gave a slight nod. And with that, the first raiding group would resupply in Brink and move out, flanked by the first heavy Arbon. The first heavy was already approaching legendary status. Commanded by the Great Khan himself, he hand-selected the very best warriors to join the unit and considered it to be his own personal bodyguard. The first heavy had fought at every major battle and had been defending Brink from countless Empire attempts to retake the city, all of which, of course, ended in failure. The group reached Tengu's vault. It was a towering spire, elevated on a small hill in a mass of flat desert. In addition, the area seemed to be especially infested with sand skimmers, one of the desert's most fearsome natural predators. Defending it was a large garrison of heavy samurai. This would be a far more difficult battle than the previous raids. Temujin ordered his force to circumnavigate the spire and deploy on a small hill north of the fortress. He planned to draw in the samurai garrison and engage it with his heavy Arbon, while the light soldiers shot at them from the flanks. Unfortunately for the Great Khan, the battle did not evolve in such a manner. The garrison would not engage the Horde in small waves. Instead, virtually all the samurai would charge the Horde. In addition, sand skimmers attracted by the battle would join in the fray. It was hard fought, but eventually the Horde would push the samurai back to the gate of the vault. Temujin wished he had allocated more troops to this operation, but still he had managed as the Horde gathered at the foot of the spire. The Horde proceeded up the ramp, and once they reached the top, they were greeted by the Vault Warden and another group of heavy samurai. Once again, desperate melee fighting ensued as the Vault Warden rallied the last of his defense and tried to beat back the Horde. But by this time, it was far too little, too late. The Horde was well on their way to complete dominance over the vault, and once the Horde had ground down the last of the samurai, the process of releasing all the vault's prisoners began, and of course, offering them citizenship. Many of the prisoners would agree to the oath of citizenship and become new Horde members. The rest of them were free to roam the desert wastes. Temujin simply encouraged them to stay out of his way during their travels. Time would only tell if they would meet again. With the vault broken, Temujin was pleased with the results. He had recruited enough prisoners to finally muster the 2 additional arbands he needed for the next operation. The Horde loaded up the weak and wounded and headed back to Brink, where Temujin would reveal the next stage of his plan. On the way back, however, the Horde ran into a curious new group. Out in the wastes, they encountered a patrol of soldiers, headed by a tall man in a bright gleaming suit of armor. Temujin stopped as his group turned to face this new threat. He did not recognize this faction, so, as is best in the world of Kenshi, he braced for battle. And he was not wrong. The man in the armor took one look at the Horde and said, "That looks like one. Get him!" His group drew their swords, and the Horde lifted their bows and fired. It was an easy fight for the Horde. They cut down the patrol and left nothing. Once the man in the armor was beaten, Temujin looted him and found a book, The Flame of Okran. Temujin suddenly realized who this was, the Holy Nation. He knew of them before he was exiled. The Hiver would say if you ever encountered them, you were to run, as they would kill you, or worse, enslave you. The Holy Nation only accepted humans among their ranks. Temujin knew there could be no coexistence between the Horde and the Holy Nation, and already considered them at war. But I must save tomorrow's problems for tomorrow's me, Temujin thought, as he began the journey back to Brink once again. At Brink, the Khan issued a flurry of orders. He ordered his new recruits back to the Golden City, where they would be trained in the manner of the Horde. He issued orders for massive supply garus to be brought to Brink, filled with food, bolts, and all manner of building material. He promoted the best and brightest serving in the garrison, and was able to muster his 2 additional Arbons, the 4th Light and the 4th Heavy, commanded by Slick and Get Shrek'd Bud respectively. He then ordered all Arbons to muster at Brink for a campaign. Once everyone had mustered at Brink, Temujin would do one last thing. He consolidated the 10 best immortals into his Arbon and proclaimed it to be the first immortal Arbon. Temujin would need these rock-hard immortals for the next battle. Temujin then gathered together his soldiers, all 8 Arbons in total, and then explained to them what was about to happen. "Tonight, brothers, we march on Heng. We will destroy the economic heart of this corrupt empire, and after this, we will march on the capital itself." A mass roar of approval rang up from the soldiers, and soon they were organized into a column formation and marched for the great trade city. Despite the fact this force was so massive, the Horde emphasis on mobility would pay off, and the column moved swiftly through the night and arrived at Heng in the early morning. Knowing just how much he risked in this operation, Temujin would take no chances and would establish a siege fortress. He found a small bit of high ground and marked out the plans. This small fortress would contain walls, beds, and storage for food and bolts, everything needed for a long and protracted battle. Temujin then ordered his best scout, Sly Desert Fox, to see what defenses the Empire had prepared. The skeleton obliged, and when he returned, if he could smile, that robot would be grinning ear to ear. "War," he said. "War?" Temujin asked back. "War," affirmed the skeleton. "The Empire and the Traders Guild are already at war with each other. Blood already runs in the streets of Heng."